Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology Podcast, sponsored by Clear Company. On today's podcast, I'd like to talk about NPS surveys, that's Net Promoter Scores, in recruiting, as well as sentiment scoring in recruitment marketing. Net Promoter or Net Promoter Scores, also known as NPSs, are a tool that can be used to gauge customer or candidate loyalty. It's an alternative to traditional customer satisfaction research and typically correlates with revenue growth. I'm going to reread that lessons. It's an alternative to traditional customer satisfaction research and typically correlates with revenue growth. In recruiting, the NPS metric is based on how employees or candidates answer one question. On a scale of 0 to 10, how likely is it that you would recommend this company as a place to work? I'm joined today by Will Staney. He's the founder of Proactive Talent, a recruiting and employer brand consulting and staffing company, as well as the co-founder of the Talent Brand Alliance, a professional community for employer branding and recruitment marketing professionals. Will, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Jessica.
So before we get started, let's talk a little bit about your background. And I also want you to talk a little bit about the Talent Brand Alliance, because I think that for folks who are interested in learning more, you have a great community of people that can really give folks good information and resources.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, background on myself, I was a talent acquisition leader and employer brand leader at various companies for over a decade. From started my career at VMware, went over to SuccessFactors SAP, and then was the head of TA, building the first recruiting organization at Glassdoor. And then went over to Twilio and did the same thing before starting my own firm, Proactive Talent. And then Talent Brand Alliance has really been a labor of love that me and my best friend, Brian Cheney, who's the global head of employer branding over at Indeed, came together and did. I think what we really wanted is, employer branding and talent attraction has been something that's really evolved over the last decade or so. And we met as friends, through that connection. We're introduced by a recruiter friend of ours, Kim Hollinshead, which I believe you know.
Yeah.
And it was through our friendship that we kind of grew together and we're learning from each other. And we were like, I wish there was, a community of other people, as this is becoming more common of a profession, that where they could kind of experience what we've been able to together and grow in our careers together and learn from each other through friendship and mentorship and shared learning. And that, over a pint in 2013, is when we kind of conceptually came up with Talent Brand Alliance. And then we finally actually launched it in 2016 and really formalized it in 2017. And now we have almost 1,000 employer brand practitioners. So these are people who are actually leading the charge for building the strategy and executing on the employer brand programs at their companies across the globe. And in addition to this online community where everyone's sharing, we do monthly member calls where members can come in and really dive into specific topics that are coming up a lot in the community, like Glassdoor or candidate experience or building an executive dashboard to report on what you're doing. We also share a lot of free resources. So, people are like, gosh, I wish I had a tool that could help me, calculate the NPS score, right, for a candidate experience. And then somebody will be like, oh yeah, I built that out, here you go. And so this community focused way of learning and upscaling the whole industry is what we're going for. And so we also do 2 events per year called Talent Brand Summits. That's where we get everyone together in our experiential workshop, and we pair people up based on who they're trying to meet and what they want to learn. And so we have a mentorship committee that helps put people at roundtables that have some of the same interests, but are maybe at different levels of their career that they can learn from each other. And they also do a lot of really fun things together. Like here at the Austin event, we do archery and hatchet throwing, and we and we do like an Iron Chef cooking competition, and it's a way to get people to really bond and create friendships in this industry. Because for most employer brand leaders, and this is really important to know, at least in now, most employer brand leaders are a one-person show, or they have a very small team. And a lot of times they don't have somebody in their day-to-day to confide in, to ask questions, to learn from, to shoot ideas off of. And that's what Talent Brand Alliance becomes for these folks. But it's an amazing community that's highly engaged, and it's been a really awesome journey for us.
Great. Well, it's kind of a family. I feel like the atmosphere that you guys have put together and just the culture, and we'll link to some resources and how to connect with the Talent Brand Alliance if you want to become a part of the community and take part in some of their conferences and great learning opportunities. Let's get back to the NPS survey. So Net Promoter Scores. And NPS is traditional in marketing. You've seen NPS surveys used to measure success for a number of different programs. And now we're seeing that move into recruiting now with candidate and employee surveys. Have you seen this adopted over time, and can maybe talk a little bit about how it's being used?
Yeah, this came up a lot and around like 2014, 2015, people started talking about that a lot. And I think it's really important. I think as recruiting is becoming more and more a marketing initiative, especially in where we are in our economy, when we have, a low unemployment rate, the experience you're giving candidates greatly influences your overall brand as a company. Right? We know like candidates are our consumers. And so for me, like NPS has been just a really great way to measure and put our audience for hiring and our employer brand into one of three categories. Like I want to know, are they a detractor? Meaning they're not particularly thrilled with us as an employer, or they had a bad experience? I definitely want to know that. Or are they passive? Like who's sort of in the middle? They're somewhat like, okay, yeah, you seem like a good employer, but I'm not really super interested in working for you at this moment. So are they passive? And then I especially want to know who within our realm and who knows our brand are promoters, right? These are people, meaning we're creating agents out there that are helping expand our brand. They're fans. They engage with our content. They're actively trying to get jobs at our company. I want to know that because I want to interact with these folks in different ways and move maybe some of these detractors or passives into a promoter. And that's because when you're thinking about your employer brand, when you have people who are promoters, it amplifies and helps you get awareness into that employer brand and gives more life and attracts more quality candidates.
I'm listening to you talk about this, and I think that the trust factor and really leveraging those promoters is such a great way to evangelize the recruitment brand itself or the organization. And we've talked about on the blog the Edelman Trust Barometer, which really kind of showcases that it's not the leaders, the organizational leaders, who are the most effective promoters of the organization, but in our case, it's the employees and the candidates themselves.
Yes, absolutely. Because nowadays, even every job posting typically it will be shared, right? You want people that maybe read your job description, see your career site, and then say, hey, this isn't a right opportunity for me, but whoa, wow, what a great employer. I'm going to share this with some friends that I just heard might be looking, right? And they have to really have enough information to form a good positive experience. And NPS allows you to measure if people are having those types of experiences. And when I was at Twilio, and this is not even very hard to do, incorporating NPS, you likely already are doing a candidate experience survey or something that you send to candidates, simply adding a single question of having them, how likely they are to recommend applying to your company or recommend you as an employer between 0 and 10 to any survey that you do. It's relatively easy. In fact, I was even able to automate it when I was leading recruiting at Twilio. I actually used their own technology and a little bit of Python code to build an NPS score app. And essentially what they did is any candidate that came in and interviewed with us, they received a text message right after that interview that said, how likely would you be to recommend somebody to interview with our company, 0 through 10. And whenever they responded, that put that score into an Excel spreadsheet, which automatically took them all and calculated an average NPS in real time all the time. And so I, as a TA leader, could always go in and see, like, how is our candidate experience affecting our overall NPS and our employer brand. And it's just a good, to me, keystone metric for that, because I think NPS for hiring is very, very related into the experience. So candidate experience. And for me, candidate experience is a keystone habit, because if you really dive into it and you really focus on it, all your other recruiting metrics improve.
I just want to back up. So
Sure.
you created this automation that happened using Twilio's software to send a text message to the candidate to ask them what their experience was like. This isn't something that you outsourced to another group or brought in a group of developers.
No, and that's kind of the magic of what Twilio itself does, is it makes it really easy to automate something very complex when it comes to, it's a telecom API. And so with some basic Python code and, an account at less than $10 a month through Twilio, I was able to just, write that formula in and to where, if I shoot it out the text and they reply, it automatically knows what to do as far as taking that score and putting it into a Google Sheet. So it was very low cost and took maybe a couple hours of time to build.
Yeah, and then you have the metrics forever, like that information you're getting automatically, and you can share with your leadership team or dive into maybe more why scores aren't as high as they have been in the past.
Yeah, and so for me, it was like at Twilio, every new employee learns to code a little bit and they build an app. And I just decided as a TA leader to make that my app. Now, for anybody else, there are even easier ways to do this. Incorporating in a SurveyMonkey survey that automatically pushes out through an email in your ATS after an interview. Some ATSs themselves can track and do surveys and things like that. And so there's a lot of ways to do this that are pretty low or no costs at all, but gives you, I think, a really important metric that can help you improve.
This is great. Well, I love it. So I just love how you're using all the automation. I think people kind of get stuck in thinking that they only have ATS and those tools, and they can't reach out to other technology.
Oh yeah, because you even have things like if then that and Zapier, where you can automate a Gmail, tie it into a Google spreadsheet, and automate a lot of this, where it's really an NPS survey is something you just turn on and it just does it.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan of automation. I mean, for the co-working space that you've been a part of, our whole entire onboarding process for new members is completely automated, and it keeps going and it doesn't fail. And then I don't have to worry about going in and finding that information. The Zapier or the integrations take care of those things for me. I love it. Why do you think it's taken so long for recruiters and HR teams to get on board with NPS surveys?
Because I think it's traditionally a marketing mindset. And I think while a lot of companies are moving to think more like marketers as a recruiting organization, still most recruiters are not marketers. I think for most of them, they identify more with sales and HR, and that is changing. But I think for most, and I've worked with over 50 clients in the last few years through my company, and I see that that marketing skill set, that taking that data-driven approach to measuring things like sentiment or NPS is typically you're already bought into that employer brand, and you're building some of that program. We already know, 97% of companies know that having a positive and a good employer brand will improve their business. Yet, less than 30% of them are actually investing in this at this point right now. And so there's a gap. There's a gap between what the industry needs and what they're actually doing. And that's why I founded my firm, and that I've been speaking in this industry for well over 12 years now, is because I really think HR and recruiting is at this flexion point where they need to evolve and think more of this way. So I just, we're a little bit more of one of those laggard industries, but that is changing.
I agree. Well, so I want to ask you about benchmarks. And one of the questions that I've gotten from folks who have asked about NPS scoring is like, what's an average score? Is there something that you're seeing that's an average score? Is it 7 and above? Like in your experience?
For candidate experience, you're probably most probably would be averaging and passive, but it's really about what your goal as an organization is. It's like everyone's goal when it comes to NPS is to have people average in the promoter section, which is a 9 or 10, meaning they're extremely likely to recommend you as an employer. I would say most organizations who are measuring this tend to be higher, because if you're an organization that's measuring NPS, it means you're putting thought and effort into making a great candidate experience and an employer brand. So they probably skew higher, but realistically, you're probably saying more of that 7 or 8 as an average, which means majority of people are a bit passive, right? And then obviously you want as little as possible of people rating you from a 0 to 6. 0 to 6 means, they don't really recommend you very highly, and that there's work to be done as far as your candidate experience and maybe interviewing or the employer brand, the information that you're putting out there about yourself.
I feel like the bar is kind of low right now. There are a lot of companies doing really great employer branding. There are some, but the majority of organizations are not doing amazing things. So you could just send a response email thanking them for the interview, or doing a survey asking for their input, and that's going to be better than 50% of your peers.
Oh yeah, I mean, we still have a majority of employers who have really clunky and long application processes. Like that alone is just, you're talking about moving. If you just make your application process simple, and the technology's there to do it pretty simply, that can take you from a 70% drop off, meaning 70% of people going to your jobs not completing the apply, to an 80% completion. Right? Just by making it easier. There's a lot of little things that you can do that can really improve your candidate experience, and thus increase, in making people advocates and fans of your brand. You don't have to have a big 6-figure employer brand budget. There are little things you can do. Something as simple as, looking at your interview process and making sure small things happen, like somebody writes their name on a whiteboard, or asks if they need water, or gives them a break to go to the restroom. Like these little things make a big difference. At the end of the day, these are human beings evaluating you as an employer, and you evaluating human beings as a potential employee. And so the more human you can be in the process, and that's going to make people more likely to be fans of your company. And I think there's a lot of great case studies out there, like Virgin Media and others, where they've really proven this from an ROI standpoint, that when they've focused on, and they started measuring NPS, and they focused on candidate experience, that not only did it improve their hiring, but it actually grew the revenue of their company, right? And that's when you start measuring things like this and focusing on them, that's when you as a HR department and recruiting department are no longer just a cost center. You're a revenue driving organization and a strategic partner at the table. And so, measuring things like this can really change the way the rest of the company sees recruiting and HR.
I agree. And suddenly you're a revenue driver, and then people can see how taking care of the candidate or following up timely or offering to go to where the restrooms are or the bathroom or, water, whatever in your hiring process suddenly impacts the bottom line. And it's a concrete thing that people can see.
Yeah, because if we really truly believe that candidates are consumers, and they are, right? If they have bad experiences with your hiring, they will not be your customer. They're not going to buy your products anymore. That's that case study with Virgin Media is they found out that 6% of the people they interviewed were existing customers, but 16% of people who were going through the interview process were having terrible experiences, were no longer using them. So they were losing $6 million in revenue a year because of a terrible hiring process. Once they focused on that, changed that, they actually found that they were adding like 6 or 7 million in revenue because people who weren't customers before, after going through their interview process, became customers. I've done this. Like I've interacted with a company in a buying their product way, or saw media that changed my perception of them and made me more likely to actually use their products. And this works for B2B too, right? Because I may not be working for a company, but I may be working for a company that uses your company's products, and I can influence those purchase decisions. So, B2B companies can't just say, oh, that we're not consumers, so that doesn't apply. It very much does. And this is coming from somebody who's led recruiting at pretty much all B2B companies in my career.
Well, we'll link to the Virgin Media study and the transcript of this podcast as well for everyone here. Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you are listening to the Workology podcast sponsored by Clear Company. Today we are talking with Will Staney about NPS surveys in recruitment marketing.
This episode has been sponsored by Clear Company, a complete talent management software provider. Clear Company's software solutions include award-winning applicant tracking, onboarding, and performance management solutions. Hire, retain, and engage more top talent with Clear Company.
I want to move on to sentiment analysis. It's also known as external brand perception. It's something that we're seeing a lot also in recruitment marketing. Do you think that NPS surveys measure sentiment, or is sentiment analysis just limited to social listening and data mining with natural language processing?
I kind of look at NPS is measuring people who have actually interacted in your hiring process or interacted with your product, and sentiment as your reputation and what people are saying and what they kind of think about you. So sentiment's more of an uneducated guess, and NPS is more measuring after they've actually had an experience with your brand. So sentiment is really useful to know sort of how you are currently perceived and people are talking about you, whereas NPS is more reflective of how likely are we gaining more fans, whereas sentiment's like what are our current fans or detractors saying currently.
Are there any HR technology or recruitment technology companies that you see out there right now that are doing work in sentiment analysis that are worth noting?
No.
So this is an area of opportunity for HR tech companies, I guess. Make note.
Yeah, I mean, most companies, most companies are, I think, are kind of doing this with traditional marketing, department tools, or making themselves or SurveyMonkey. Sentiment. There's some free tools online that I've used. I think it's like Social Mention.
Oh yeah, Social Mention. I feel like sentiment analysis is becoming popular more in human resources, like to measure the sentiment in like Slack and Teams and kind of internal conversations, but not necessarily as common externally in recruitment marketing.
No.
Well, I feel like we've covered all that, and so it's sentiment analysis. It's not happening.
It's not. No. I mean, I would think that's pretty advanced. Like, I think most employers right now are just trying to figure out how do they tell their story. Like, how do they differentiate themselves from competitors? Because it is a battle out there for talent, and if you're not differentiating yourself and understanding what your position in the talent marketplace is, like that's step one. I feel like a lot of companies are still in step one. Now, if you get more advanced organizations that have been doing this a long time, like VMware, Dell, SAP, those types of companies that have been doing this a while and they're advanced, I bet they are measuring things like sentiment and getting more advanced with it. But they have teams and budgets and resources dedicated to this. And I think for most employers that are probably listening to this podcast, they're still trying to figure out some of the basics. But it's good to know like that sentiment is something to measure, and that especially NPS score is something that anybody could do free, and it's a good spot check on how to improve, and it's still worthwhile to do, because it's something real easy and quick that you can do that could help you change your practices.
I love that you said it's as simple as a survey monkey survey that you put into the automation. And so once they apply or they complete the interview or the position is closed out, as part of the automated email message response to the candidate and invites them to take the survey.
Exactly.
How do you recommend recruiting leaders to overcome maybe information resistance? I think there might be some fear that a candidate distrusts the organization or they don't want to share, so they might not take the survey.
Yeah, I mean, that's always a possibility. If you send a survey that somebody's not going to do it, it's not a good reason not to do it, because some will, especially those. I think it's kind of, you think about like Glassdoor, like how do we get more employees to give us reviews on Glassdoor, and how do we get people to do certain things? I think timing is everything. If you send out an NPS score, relatively quickly after they interviewed, when it's fresh on their mind, they're a lot more willing to do it. If you wait a couple weeks and then ask them to reflect on what their experience was, you're going to decrease the chances of them actually doing it. But if it's relatively right after it, it's on their mind already. They're trying to think like, did I do good on that interview? Like, what was my perception of that employer? And they're going to respond rather quickly because it's timely. Same thing with like a Glassdoor review. I mean, if you have an all hands meeting or it's somebody's anniversary as an employee, that's timely time to ask them for their, like, hey, you've been here 2 years, happy anniversary. Now that you're a veteran, we'd love you to share your experience on Glassdoor. Boom. They're like twice or 3 times as likely to actually do it at that point. So timing and context is important.
I love it. And you can even automate that, like in the celebration email, happy anniversary. Don't forget to leave us a review. And then again, you don't have to get bogged down by the details, and it's happening. And then people have the option to choose whether they want to share or not share, but at least you're asking. Exactly.
You have to ask. You won't know. And asking at the right times is helpful to get higher response rates. And I think also telling people like the why behind we do this is super important. So if you're sending out a quick NPS, you can say something like, hey, this will take you 5 seconds to rate us 0 to 10. We use this score to make sure that we're constantly improving the interview process for our candidates and our recruiting program here at X company, right? When they know that this is bigger than them, this is something that's going to help other candidates have a better experience, whether they had a good experience or especially if they had a bad experience, they're going to be more likely to give you input. Obviously, people who had bad experiences are more motivated to give you feedback, and you want that because you can't improve if you don't know when you're screwing up.
Well, Will, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about Net Promoter Scores and sentiment as it relates to recruitment, marketing, and human resources. I really appreciate it. Where can people go to learn more about Proactive Talent and the Talent Brand Alliance?
So Proactive Talent is proactivetalent.com. We're at Proactive Talent on all the social networks. And then Talent Brand Alliance, you can find us at talentbrand.org or at talentbrand.org on social.
All right. And we'll link to Will's LinkedIn profile as well if you want to connect with him directly. Thanks again, Will.
Thanks, Jessica.
Using NPS surveys to help improve hiring and retention, turn employees into brand ambassadors, and measure the impact of changes in your workplace can be a game changer for HR and recruiting teams, especially when it comes to employer branding. I'm so glad we were able to chat with Will and get his advice on how to use these scores in recruiting and HR. I also love that we talked about automation, Twilio, and Zapier, and all those cool tools that you can be able to use to automate your NPS surveys. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast sponsored by Clear Company. This podcast is for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill. Until next time, visit workology.com to listen to all our previous podcast episodes.
Production services for the Workology podcast with Jessica Miller-Merrill provided by TotalPicture.com.